you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit, and now here's your host, Rich Barris.
All right, folks, welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am your host, Rich Barris. We have Matt Braynard joining us shortly to take a look at Look Ahead America's Year 1 scorecard for election integrity. We have a lot of bills. I shared this with locals a day or two ago, but I know a lot of people probably haven't seen the overall. What's the objective of this? What are we going to talk about? So before Matt gets on, we're going to go through a couple of things. I'm going to try to stay summary level so we can get in more detail with Matt and then see what Look Ahead America has planned going into coming up this year. All right. But before we do that, I have a little bit of a surprise for locals. All right. I think we are at about, I don't know, $400 for the April survey, which always starts at the end of the month. So we have couple of weeks to do it, and I haven't been pushing the public polling project that hard this month for two reasons. One, March was conducted at the end of March, so we had some time, and two, that it does look like we have maybe something going on. I don't want to jump the gun here. Maybe something going on where we can be doing a weekly appearance on a show to help us build a contributor base, which would be great, because if we do, then it's less burden financially on the people who give month after month. We had a lot of new contributors last month, and it completely vaulted, us to our goal in that last March 2022 project. All right, so the more we have, the merrier, but also the quicker and the more often we can run these surveys. Now, in order to do that, I think I'm only going to do this for locals, but I think I'm just going to dip my toe in the water really quickly. Obviously, detailed demographics, but not a ton of questions. Maybe we'll just jump in and we'll get right track, wrong track, and Joe Biden's approval again before we start the larger survey, hopefully, if we hit our goal, at the end of the month. All right. So go to the link, check it out. But and fund it. But just know that if we do have one in like a week or two, then that would be something that's just Biden's approval rating that we just kind of jumped in to see what it was and jumped right back out. All right. So there's a couple of things in the bigger survey that I want to ask about. And I do think it's time we expand how many different people we pit against each other for 2024 hypothetical matchups, because unlike a lot of other pollsters, I really do feel that this stuff is baked in the cake pretty early. And if you know what to ask, the vast majority of the American public already kind of does know, whether they would want to admit it to themselves or not. They already know how they're going to vote in the future, barring any significant event that would change that. And the rest is just response bias, folks. And if you can't shelter yourself from that, then you'll be subjected to that. Your polls will gyrate like crazy all over the place, and it will not reflect public opinion accurately. All right. So yeah, I thought that would be cool to do, to just jump in real quick and say, let's take a look at Biden's approval before we go to the next month. Okay. So with that said, we've had before we bring on Matt, I'm going to give a glance of the report. We've had some pretty crappy economic news. These people can pretend to point to really what are easily manipulated, especially in the labor market, numbers, in an effort to bury their heads in the sand and pretend as if the number one driver of why Democrats are headed for a complete and total ass kicking is somehow not the economy. Inflation is still an economic issue. When we say economy and jobs. So we really are talking about the overall concept, general concept of the labor market, and then other economic conditions, labor mobility, whatever it may be. But then there's cost of living, inflation, which is much more critical to like wages and the value of somebody's, paycheck month to month. There is without a doubt this attempt to push this idea that wages are growing so they can minimize how much damage inflation is doing. And they're citing distorted Bureau and Labor Statistics data. All right. And what do I mean by distorted? Just bear with me. To try to use that 12-month percentage as a way to say, no, they're growing. When in truth, real wages have fallen under Joe Biden considerably after, here's the kicker, after they began to recover and the distortions ironed out before Donald Trump left office. Post April to May shutdown to before Donald Trump left office. Under Donald Trump, there was wage growth in the Bureau of Labor Statistics report of 3% or more for the first time since the third quarter before the Great Recession. That was a big deal. It stayed like that for a consecutive year, 12 consecutive months back to back, something we didn't even see very often before the Great Recession. Then 13 months, then 14 months, then 15 months. This was going to continue until the shutdown. Then we had 2 months really of really crappy distorted. And by distorted, what I mean is you had so many people. All right. So if you remove all of these service sector jobs from the labor market, it looks like wages are growing more. If you are not service sector, I should really say like leisure and hospitality, which took a big hit during the shutdown. It looks like wages are growing. If you remove everybody for 2 weeks out of a month and you shut down the economy completely, then of course it looks like wages are going to decline. But then when those jobs re-enter, they'll shoot back higher. Then leisure and hospitality begins to recover, adds lower paying jobs to the mix, which will drag down that 12-month. So despite it literally saying in the Bureau of Labor Statistics report that wage data is distorted, jobs data are distorted, and when it comes to construction, manufacturing, whatever it may be, it is typical, the harder you fall, the bigger the recovery. And they are using this very simple principle to try to sound as if we have this incredible economic growth. If you collapsed 11% in GDP, and then you grow by 5 the next quarter, you are still -6 from where you were before the decline. They are acting as if there's been some tremendous amount of growth. Forecast for the next quarter is under 2%, right back to where we were during the days of Barack Obama. The only year we had 3% or greater growth was under Donald Trump. That's it. And in fact, the decline in that final year was not at all inevitable. Had people, had businesses, again, read the ISM data, it just came out again, had they felt as if they had a president who, no matter what, was not going to allow some arbitrary number of cases be excelled that triggered another shutdown, then they would have continued to build up business inventories. The supply chain would have been right back on track, and we would have seen greater GDP growth than what we had seen in his final quarter and then in Joe Biden's first quarter. There is no doubt about it. It doesn't matter if you're talking about transportation, which was obviously a huge deal. It doesn't matter if you're talking about energy, which impacts everything. It doesn't matter if you're talking about leisure and hospitality. People took a step back and said, let's just wait to see how this plays out. In the end, by the way, and there was a great article on People's Pundit Daily that we did that you could look at. You know what? Sometimes I feel like I really want to just reopen that puppy. Just to put out maybe a weekly thing that says, This is what you were told this week, and here is why it is bull. Especially economic stuff. Because if you looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data under Donald Trump and not the Bureau of Economic Analysis, you would actually understate real wage growth. You wouldn't realize, especially when they do their annual revisions, you wouldn't realize that real wage growth under Donald Trump exceeded Barack Biden's tenure significantly more than initially thought, and that Joe Biden's tenure thus far is even weaker than it looks just looking at the BLS data. So, and when I say significant, I mean significant. And you can check it out. Simply search personal income. Trump, Obama. It'll pop right up. And compare it to what you see now. All right, mortgage applications today, down again. The composite index, down negative 6.3. Down negative 6 points. It's negative 6.3. The purchase index actually rose the prior week, which is a key metric in this survey. It fell this week to 3. It fell by 3%. It's negative 3. The refi index was negative 15 last week, and now it's negative 10 again this week. All right. Now, refi, as we see interest rates go up, of course, you would expect refinancing to start to slow. Why would people do that? If they had an interest rate at 2.98 on a mortgage, maybe, they're going to refi for 4% right now. Doesn't really make sense. So I'm looking at the purchase, though. The overall composite's one thing. I'm looking at that purchase index, which is what drove that composite this month, unfortunately. And Lauren June's words are ringing in my ear from that last pending home sales index report. That jump from 3 to 4% priced the average American home buyer out of the market. Maybe some banks say, you know what, you could have done it at 3. You can't do it at 4. That distance turned out to be significant. And why does that matter? Because we can't get inflation under control. There is no scenario unless the Fed does something much more than what they announced on raising rates. We put ourselves in this position where in order to get structural problems under control, we have got to raise rates. As we do so, though, what do we hurt when we do it? Damn near everything. Lending will decline. Mortgage applications is a perfect example. First-time home buyers are not going to be entering into that market. So, when you find yourself in a position where there's really no good answer, there's no good policy, because you're screwed if you do, you're screwed if you don't, then you've really been led astray here. And yes, the overall cause of inflation is an excess of money supply. We know that. I get it. For those, Ron Paul purists out there, you're right. I'm not arguing with you. I'm simply saying that we've been allowed to kind of get away and skirt from those basic economic principles in the past. Now those people, Peter's perfect example, now they may have the last laugh while the rest of the country hurts. Because the dollar is not the almighty dollar anymore but in most of the 3 to 6 month scenarios, the dominance of our dollar, especially when it came to commodities, is in question. That is all that allowed us to do, to be reckless, to be careless and reckless, to forget about leverage, to sell like a prostitute the future of our children and our grandchildren for our own greed and comfort level. There's no nice way to put it. We passed hardship off to our children like a bunch of cowards. But it has to come. There is really no way out. There is no good way out here. And I think we're just going to continue to see it. So you could take your uninsurance rate, your unemployment rate, you can stick it up your butt. You could take your modest decline in jobless claims and stick it up your butt. There have been so many people who haven't come back, it doesn't even matter anymore. Insured unemployment rate being manipulated because of response assistance. It almost doesn't matter anymore. We are still negative millions and millions and millions of jobs. And I'm not at all sure that would have been the case had this current administration not taken over. Sad but true. All right, composite final. By the way, this month, there's 2 more things I would like to read here. Come on, load up. All right, the PMI fell 57.7. The services index fell to 58. And international trade in goods and services, which is a bigger deal report. This is from yesterday, but here we are, is negative 89.2 billion. This is another sad economic trend. We were actually on our way to shrinking the trade deficit. That was happening. But we sacrificed it. We gave it up. All right. Looking a little bit better. But, the 50 billion range is feeling really far away. And there are always ups and downs. But looking at it long term here. And everything that we had done going into this conflict with Ukraine, or conflict over Ukraine. Everything we've done, I just don't really see any economic benefit. It's all risk. And that goes for the trade balance, which is really what trade, right, is about. So, all right, with that in mind, it's 12:18. Let's move on to this report. I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a recap because I miss going over some of the economic stuff. And it's started to freaking depress me a little bit. So I didn't want to become a negative Nancy, and we moved on for a while. But I think it's time to, I think it's time to face reality. And there's this strategy by Democrats to come back full circle here. There's this strategy by Democrats to pretend as if all is well. And that anybody really complaining about inflation or the economy, and look, the MSNBC headline that we showed last week, their poll shows Biden falling to a historic low, and they tag on the end of that headline, despite a booming, not a strong, not a solid, a booming economy. Joe Biden's approval falls to the lowest level ever, comma, despite a booming economy. What in Sam hell are they talking about? Booming economy. But anyway, stick your head in the sand. Pretend as if people who are, complaining or yelling that real wage growth is not keeping up with inflation, let alone what you would think from that should be a basic standard of a supposed first world country, let alone that it's not keeping up with it. Tell them all that they're just whiners who are basically delusional, and see how far that gets you in November. Just read a comment by Hector. It's booming. It's booming because it's about to explode. The whole damn thing is a house of cards. And we're not even preparing our economy for the structural changes that need to be made, things we must produce if we're going to go down this path that the idiots who write for Bloomberg suggested we go down. Just time to accept a Cold War with Russia and China. If you want to have half a prayer to win something like that, you better fix what's broken structurally with the economy? What do they make that we absolutely need to have? That if they wanted to, they could put a hurt on us for it. There's no serious discussion about that. Tragically, again, the last administration did have a plan. A second term that would have saw certain things like rare minerals, pharmaceuticals and their ingredients, PPE, you name it. And of course, defense, which is why the rare minerals issue or commodity is such a big deal. We have them in the Great Plains states. We're not allowed to go after them. We have them out west. We are not allowed to go after them. We are not allowed to mine for them. We get them from China. We get other stuff. Look at how much oil alone import from Russia. How could we be the breadbasket of the world without adequate supply of fertilizer? Is it these people are just so ideologically blind, they're incompetent. I mean, you got part ideology and then part is just corporatism. Just pure corporatism. But it's corporatism in a modern world that's surrounded by financial sector and not goods producing. At least if our elites were dominated by goods producers, it may actually work to our benefit somewhat. Maybe not for all of us, but for the nation as a whole. These people think their fake fiat economy is real. And that's power. It's not. It's not even latent power. Potential to tap into. It's not. It's fake. Especially when it all hinges on the currency, your fiat currency, being the standard. The minute it's not anymore, it's over. It's a wrap. All right, so for those who, let me pull this up because not everybody, I'm sure, saw it on Locals. Let's pull this up. What I'm going to share, and I'm going to share my whole screen here because it's small. This is the table of contents. Matt's going to be on very soon, so I don't want to just kind of throw you blind in here. All right. Because when I ask him these questions, he'll go off and you really won't understand. Table of contents has a summary, which I'm going to read. A disclaimer, we can talk about briefly. It's small. Election integrity objectives. What was the point of this review? Thumbprint, authentication of absentee ballots is a component of this section. Mandated in public voter list hygiene, major problem. As if you're a watcher of Inside the Numbers, you know. Despite ridiculous accusations that it's like a Photoshop browser image, you have seen the back end of the voter files and you know that they are not maintained well. Remember I had Mike Collins on, Patrick Witt, before he left the race for Georgia's 10th congressional district. We spoke to Mike Collins and I showed him the voter file. How many people change of address flags were no longer eligible to vote in that district, yet there they are. How many people of absurd ages somehow with active status? That is a very real problem. And I'm curious to see, or I'm curious to ask Matt himself, outside of reading this report, how he feels our supposed leaders did in crafting their legislation to address these major concerns. Now, without a doubt, there has been some wins. Look Ahead America can tout some wins under their belt. Wins under their belt this last legislative session. But there's a lot still that needs to be done. Ban on the use of black box voting equipment. We've talked about that before with Matt. The appointment of a Citizens Election Supervisory Committee. Creation and sufficient funding for a dedicated voter fraud investigation division within the state's Attorney General's office. Absolutely loved this idea. Because not to have one is the most pretentious thing in the world. Pretentious as in you're literally turning a blind eye to something we all know goes on. And the question was never whether or not it did in 2020. The question was, how serious was it? Did it impact the outcome? Was it large enough to put the outcome or the results in certain states in question? What would be the legitimate? Did it rise to the level where it would have exceeded a margin of victory? Equitable distribution of private contributions to election operations. And by the way, Fox News all of a sudden wants to acknowledge this. If you were talking about this after November 2020, you were blacklisted from Fox News. Blacklisted. Sean Hannity, according to his own text messages, talks a real big talk, but out off camera, basically blacklists people and tries to drive the message of, you just sound crazy if you talk about it. Incredible. Now they want to talk about it, even though it was their network that prematurely called Arizona for Joe Biden, which everybody knows they did. It was their network who did not cover the results of the audit accurately to their audience because it would have demonstrated that they made an incorrect call. When it didn't look good, they fired the guy on the decision desk, who, by the way, is a Democratic operative. But guess what? He's back now. Or he will be before the 2022 elections. This is the man who called races out west when people were still voting in 2018 at the House level. This is the man who refused to move certain races that were very clearly over. And this is the man who made the call in Arizona. Fox News. All right. And then, of course, the report talks about the progress states have had. But let me just read the summary here and grab a quick drink of water. All right. Look Ahead America believes our elections can best be secured by passing 6 election integrity policy objectives through all 50 U.S. state legislatures and in the District of Columbia. Across the country, 48 bills were introduced addressing our objectives, and 8 of them passed into law. Look, would it have been great if more than 8 passed? Yeah, but, for those who think it's not a large feat, I'd say, what did you do? What have you done? What have you succeeded in changing? This is an excellent record considering Look Ahead America, LAA, started this effort in mid-21 and given our limited budget. This success is largely attributed to our base of highly motivated volunteers all across the country. And while some of the legislation driven by our objectives failed, they have value as an initial step towards passage and serve as potential reference legislation for other states. I will say this. There will be states, at least 2, that will return to some of these sessions and to some of these legislation in future session. Why do I say that? Because now it's about them. In the first session, it was really about how could you have let this happen to Donald Trump and other people? And what are you going to do to fix it? Well, they hated Donald Trump, so they didn't do a damn thing. Now in Georgia and elsewhere, there's a very strong belief that they didn't go far enough. And in fact, in a state like Georgia, reinforced some of the things that made it such a questionable election contest. It's amazing, folks, how they could talk about Viktor Orban rigging an election and use all the same talking points that they used before 2020, which they told you would be perfectly fine. The most secure in history. Viktor Orban uses mass mail-in voting. Oh my God. Viktor Orban controls all of the media in the country. Oh my God. First of all, neither of those are actually true, and especially not true compared to the United States. There were no verification procedures in these states. And worse still, if you look at what we found in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and elsewhere, not only did they weaken those verification procedures without the power under the law to do so. There were very clearly election officials who didn't even follow the weakened provisions that they had that they had left in place. All right. This success is largely attributed to our base of highly motivated volunteers all across the country. I already went there. Arizona leads the pack with 3 bills that meet our election integrity objectives passed into law. No doubt, look ahead, Arizona has been leading the effort to get these reforms introduced and passed. For example, House Bill 2492, which used our election integrity objective number 2, language verbatim, recently became law on March 30th of 2022. You may remember Ducey completely reversing himself, the coward that he is. Let's be real. He had no intention of signing that until all that heat was on him. We guarantee that if any other states incorporated a Look Ahead America division within them, as Arizona has done, then we would be able to help them successfully pass a significantly larger number of voter integrity laws. And I got to tell you, because it does sound like Matt's here, and he can finish helping me talk about this here. But I got to tell you, Arizona keeps up moving in the direction it is. You cannot win elections at the statewide level when the president is in the 30s. All right. So, no, it's just the truth, Laura. Secretary of State's going to get beaten like a drum. There will be, somebody like a Carrie Lake who's the governor. So, like I said, initial progress is just that, initial progress. There will be future legislative sessions where some of these provisions that didn't get passed in these states we'll get another crack at it. But with that, I'm going to bring Matt Braynard on, ladies and gentlemen, to tell us about it. Matt, as always, thanks for joining us. I was just starting to get a head start on reading the report. So those who didn't see it on local and have an understanding of what we're talking about here, why don't you give people an overview before we get into the success you guys had? Why don't you give people an overview and explain those key, what were essentially recommendations? If you're going to pass election integrity reform, do these things. Why don't you give them an overview?
Yeah, I think that just to go over the history of it, when I was running the Voter Integrity Project in the aftermath of the 2020 election, I would get the question, hey, what can states do to prevent this problem in terms of reform? And that's certainly another angle to attack the election integrity problem at, is to educate state legislators so that they make reasonable common sense reforms to their election laws. And that's one of the ways that Look Ahead America has been leading. Our core mission is community organizing, and an important component of that is educating representatives, local, state, federal, on the important issues to the America First narrative and trying to get them to take action on that. And I'd actually say we've been pretty successful, both in terms of getting our integrity objectives introduced, even in some hostile environments, and also getting them voted on, and ultimately getting passed into law. So given that we've only been at this for about a year, I think it's pretty remarkable that we've gotten, made so much progress. But each of these election integrity objectives alone goes a long way to doing 2 things. Number 1, preventing illegal ballots from being cast. But number 2, restoring the public's confidence, which is, I think, just as important as the first. So taken together, all of these 6 would basically ensure that nobody can have any doubt about the integrity of the elections. And if your side loses, well, they lost fair and square, for the most part. Obviously, the 2020 election was extremely rigged because of the media's influence and suppressing stories critical to Biden. It was rigged because of, and we've done our own report on this as well, on how Zuckerberg and other oligarchs got intimately involved in changing the way that you vote in different parts of the state that were favorable to one party. But to run through the 6 objectives of our own, which are unique to us, and look, pretty much anytime you hear these objectives being discussed, it's because they originated with Look Ahead America and because of our volunteers doing the hard work of educating legislators on them. Number 1, and this is a really important one, is thumbprint authentication on absentee ballots.
Yeah, let's bring this up. I love this one, Matt. Yeah.
Right. And we've actually experimented with it. In fact, I have right here actually a whole box of little ink pads that can be sent with the absentee ballots, so that on the affidavit envelope where you would ordinarily put your signature, very hard to verify signatures, very subjective. I know that signature verification is a big deal to some folks, but honestly, I struggle to sign my signature the same way twice. It's not an issue with thumbprint. It's not an issue of, there's the objectivity goes away. The It can be done with a machine match very easily, which is much harder to do with a signature, and it discourages things like double voting, etc. And it's really easy to achieve. I mean, the technology is decades old, and the first time you cast an absentee ballot, if you just put your thumbprint on it, and then that's your prime, so that moving forward, all of your future ballots should match that. Or if you're new to vote, newly registered voter, on the voter registration form, you also put your thumbprint down. And we're used to doing this with many other government applications, such as concealed carry permits, etc. It's fairly standard. I mean, you try to be a volunteer for Big Brothers Big Sisters, you got to do the background check with your fingerprints on it. So that's the first one. The second one is mandated in public voter list hygiene. That means that the state governments on a regular basis take the voter list and hold it up against the National Change of Address database, which is maintained by the Postal Service, other states' driver's license databases, and also when they find somebody that potentially no longer has the right to vote in that state, they get publicly flagged, so that outside groups like ours can either provide supplemental research, or in favor of taking them off, or in favor of adding them or keeping them, saying that, oh, they're military or they should stay on it. But it needs to be done regularly, rigorously, and publicly. The third is a ban on black box voting equipment. We all know the companies that produce that. Governments that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on these machines are not allowed to open them up. Can't take a screwdriver and see what's inside. Cannot see the source code that operates the machines. And we think it's important that the state and the citizens have the ability to see every line of code and every component in every one of those voting machines, every one of those ballot counting machines, every one of those poll book machines, so that they know that it's not bugged, it's not capable of being hacked. Because we hear this all the time. We heard it a few years ago from Democrats saying that these machines could be hacked. They see them hacked right in front of them. We saw it just recently. I think it was Maxine Waters was reading something somebody put in front of her saying that, hey, these machines can be hacked. She just said that about a week ago. Banning black box voting equipment, requiring to be open source, gets rid of that problem. Number 4, appoint a Citizens Election Supervisory Committee. So we had issues with the last elections where there was video of people pulling ballots out from containers hidden under desks or something like that. What was that? Well, we didn't have anybody we could trust that could go in and have eyes on everything. So by creating an a Citizens Election Supervisory Committee, that can have at least one person that is trusted by the public. So, a group of folks, you should have at least one person on that committee that you can trust, that every voter can trust, to, after the election, say that it was a clean election. And in the meantime, that person has the ability to go anywhere the state election director goes or county election director goes, to go and see anything. They cannot be prevented from going anywhere and have complete access to all data and to all spaces and places where ballots are being handled by government officials. Number 5, creation and sufficient funding of a dedicated voter fraud investigation division within the state's Attorney General's office. In the state of Texas, there's exactly one person the Attorney General's office is to investigate accusations of voter fraud. One person in what is our largest state. That's unacceptable. And in many states, they don't have anybody who's dedicated to that job of securing our elections. And you'll see, you saw Attorney General Robert Barr and other folks saying, oh, there were no problems with the election. Well, you don't see any problems with the election if you don't have an apparatus and infrastructure for investigating allegations of voter fraud. I stood outside the Attorney General's office in Arizona about a month ago insisting that they take our data, that they review it. Well, it wasn't clear whose job that was, and I guess the Attorney General had playtime with his nunchucks scheduled because he didn't want to come out and talk to us.
Yeah, Matt, let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about that because I have my own experience on that as well. You read Bill Barr's book come out, or you hear what he wrote in it, and they act like, or he acts like, that the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, conducted this widespread or large-scale investigation into things that people were finding. I know you had offered them research results. We offered them research results. I never got a phone call, Matt. Did you? So I'm like listening to what he's saying and claiming in this book, and I really am serious. I'm wondering whether you did. I know you offered it to them, but we never got a call to be interviewed. Nobody went. There was no investigation, as far as I know. I don't know how we could claim that.
We actually did get a call from the FBI asking us for the evidence, but we provided it to them. And we never heard anything again.
And never heard anything back, right?
It wasn't like speculative. It was like, this is a clearly illegal ballot cast in the state. Here is why it is illegal. Right. completely ignored, and it was ignored again just recently. We provided like concrete, look, this person who cast a ballot, whoever cast that ballot, whether it was them or somebody else, not eligible, clearly not eligible for these reasons, and it was ignored. But we've got to continue to raise the volume and bring the pain on the government officials who are not doing their jobs. Oh, let me just get to the sixth and final of our election integrity points. And this is one that we've seen introduced a lot and in a few cases past. It's the equitable distribution of private contributions to election operations. So what Zuckerberg's operation did is they picked Democrat areas, invested hundreds of millions into those. I'm not saying like a private organization going around giving people free rides to the polls, right? That's legal. But giving money directly to the election apparatus, the election infrastructure, government, to make it easier to vote in places that went heavily for Biden, but not make it easier to vote in the same state and counties that would vote for Trump. This is clear corporate election interference. And our saying is, look, if you want to make a contribution to elections in Georgia, fine, but that contribution must be equitably, equally distributed throughout the state. So you can't just cherry pick the areas and basically co-opt the local government to change the circumstances of how elections are conducted. Now, some states just straight up banned private contributions, which technically meets our standard because it is an equitable distribution of zero, which is fine with us.
Nothing for anybody. Yeah,
that's
no
fine too.
Yeah.
But those are the six, and taken together, I mean, those are very unique. There are a lot of other organizations that wanted to get on the election integrity bandwagon, and I remember going to the Republican National Committee winter meeting in January of 2021, and the chairman, Ron Romney, said, we're going to not announce our ideas for election integrity reform, not announce a plan to get there, not announce a committee that would do it, or not announce the people who would be on the committee, that committee would then be formed to then provide ideas. But she just said, we're going to have a committee on election reform. And, months and months and months go by, nothing happens. Same thing for many other organizations in D.C. known by their letter names. They talk about the issue a lot, but they don't do anything about it. Look Ahead put together, after heavily researching it, 6 policy objectives, and we didn't just put them out there and let them lie, which is sort of the MO for most think tanks in this city, like Cato, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
But we put boots on the ground that marched into these legislators' office and articulated them, explained them. We provided many tools to volunteers to be able to go to their state legislators and say, hey, this is how we fix the election, and I want you to do this. We got bills introduced in places like New Jersey. We made progress in California on the black box voting equipment. So all across the country, thanks to volunteers helping us and the infrastructure and leadership we were able to provide, we made a difference. We have made elections more secure in this country thanks to our efforts, thanks to the efforts of our volunteers. And the report card documents that, and you can see that. And strangely enough, Arizona leads the way, followed by Florida, Idaho, Mississippi, South Dakota, and Tennessee.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too, one of the major but I was following this as you guys were doing this in Texas, which surprised me a little bit, because in the past, Texas was among those states that took election reforms more seriously. It doesn't shock me to see Florida, at least one objective passed. That doesn't shock me at all. But Texas, I'm wondering if you can give people some insight on that, because I did, even on locals, there are people from Texas who were, number one, curious, just didn't understand the details of what happened there, but also, 2, a little bit shocked because in the past they have at least done more, especially everybody, they know people harp on the machines, Matt. But Texas is a good example of how in the past anyway, they were much more rigorous about what they would allow to operate their, what operating systems they would allow to conduct their elections. So can you enlighten everybody on what happened in Texas?
Well, on the plus side in Texas, that was the first state to introduce what I think is, again, a very important integrity reform, is the thumbprint on the affidavit envelopes. That was, I think, the first state to actually somebody to introduce a bill to do that. Now, it didn't go armpit deep. It was very simple, but it's clearly we reached somebody there and they decided to introduce the law. Part of what's going on in Texas is that there's say, a mechanical issue with how the state legislature operates. These guys often have very tight and limited schedules for introducing legislation.
Yeah.
And Texas, I think they sort of operate on more of a once every 2 years process. So oftentimes what comes up in the legislative session is stuff that was put in the queue from last time or the time before that. So unfortunately, when it comes to state legislatures, they move very slow. They're very glacial, but we're patient and we understand. I mean, no one's expecting all 50 states to pass all 6 of these in a year.
That's right. That's right.
We have to be patient, and a lot of the things that you see pass through state legislatures, those things bounced around for a decade sometimes, before they finally got the right combination of things going for them to pass. So again, I am very pleased with our first year success. This is, again, largely attributed to many volunteers, many of whom we've met because they've heard about us through your show. But I think that it's just sometimes it's just a mechanical problem. And honestly, these state legislators have so much in front of them. They deal with everything from flood insurance to the entitlements in their state to brown site cleanup to other environmental issues to tax codes, etc. That sometimes they're just overwhelmed. But if we're persistent and we make sure they know that this is a priority to us, their constituency, eventually we'll have breakthroughs, and we've already had some success.
Yeah, objective 6, which is fantastic because without that, it would be easy for an entity or corporation or individual to. Texas is a perfect example, just like we saw in Georgia, where if you go in, Matt, and really help certain areas disproportionately, whereas you leave others underfunded or floundering or just certainly not able to match that effort, it could do it could have a lot of impact, could do a lot of damage. But Arizona, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. That was not easy, right? But ultimately, it ended up being the most successful state.
Well, remember,
right? So
go that's a state where the energy for these types of reforms was extremely
groundswell,
high and
right?
intense.
Yeah.
The people there. I mean, it was absolutely intense, and I think that we have just the right state legislators in there, the state house and state senate, who had the mental capacity to understand what's important and how these elections need to be reformed. Now, look, many states introduced, voted, and in some cases passed legislation that sort of moves chairs around on the deck of the Titanic that didn't accomplish a lot, and we reviewed a lot of them. I mean, Georgia, the initial rounds of their voter integrity legislation actually made the problem worse, if you can imagine that. And I think a large part of that is attributed to just ignorance of state legislators, not knowing and not having any, needing to be lobbied, needing to be briefed and educated on these issues.
Educated, yeah.
A lot of them, they just have these huge gaping spots. But, a lot of times when you find somebody that actually is good-hearted and wants to do the right thing, and you're patient with them and you patiently explain and articulate to them how this would help prevent illegal ballots, how it would restore confidence in the elections, they're often likely to help you. They don't, there are enough of them out there that we can make some real progress. And remember, the majority of legislatures are controlled by those who are at least nominally favorable to our cause. So I think that we can go a long way. And look, there's none of our issues here which we recommend that are remotely, I would say, radioactive.
Yeah, they're not controversial.
There's nothing in here, and there's no reason that a Democrat or a left-winger or somebody or a left-wing Republican, we're nonpartisan, would have a reason to concretely vote against really any of these issues. It doesn't, you've seen some proposals that become radioactive, like they want to limit Sunday voting, or voter ID is very important, but there's some things having to do with how ID works, and again, that's very important, but it's just not one of our 6 objectives here. So none of these things really attract it, but I think that's one of the advantages to it, because again, you look at California, we're having some serious success there with open source voting equipment. Ideally, what we do is require all the voting equipment to be open source, but it's a multi-step process. Just again, to remind your folks why patience is needed. Most states do not allow open source voting equipment de facto, not specifically, but to use voting equipment, it either has to be certified by the state and the Federal Elections Commission, or they don't do any state certification and they outsource it entirely to the Federal Elections Commission. Federal Elections Commission isn't certifying any new equipment. Period. They're just not, because of government hangups, because bureaucracy is slow and stupid, and they use COVID as an excuse, right? So the only way that so the first step is to get counties to be able to even consider using open source election equipment. Because in many cases, it's the county that decides that. So just getting the state to allow open source equipment to be considered is the first hurdle. And we're on track for that in California, because they're changing the law such that open source equipment can be evaluated by the state at no cost. That's the first little increment we have to get to before we can get to the other increments. So they're just going to make it free for it to be considered to be used, so it can be certified, so it can be considered to be used.
Yeah, that's more about even process than it is being controversial idea. So many people, I'm actually surprised by this too, because a lot of this comes from people that I would associate as with the right, have an issue with the thumbprint, Matt. And my initial response to that, and you touched on it earlier, as always, and even not even an initial, a more thorough response, is that we're putting our thumbnails on or fingerprint of some sort on our iPhones to open them up, right? Every time I open up my MacBook, I use my thumbprint. To get a job, many jobs these days, you need a background check. You have to roll your fingers over a piece of paper for a background check. So, I mean, I just think that people need to, the people who do have skepticism over that, understand that you probably crossed paths with that process somewhere, whether it was for a job, education, technology. You have already crossed paths with that requirement already in your lives. So if you can do it to secure your iPhone, you can do it to secure absentee ballots in elections. So
Well,
I just think that's a little bit overblown of a criticism.
I hear you, and it's actually two of our rebuttals to that argument. I'm very sensitive to that concern. People are very concerned about surveillance state, but
Yeah.
two rebuttals. Number one is that the thumbprint can be hashed and stored, so that it's basically a one-way hash, and that it can be secured to only the state board of elections, so that they can't use that to recreate your thumbprint. They can only use it to match it the next time you cast a ballot. And there's some better ways to secure that through encryption, through just basically one-way encryption that can't be unencrypted the other way. But the other thing that I think is most interesting is that, like, when you take your regular mail-in ballot, which you're signing now, when you handle that paper, your fingerprint's already all over it. And if the government wants your signature, if they want your thumbprint, they actually can lift your fingerprint off the ballot. It's covered in it. So if they want it, they can take it already. And this is just really about making it easy for a machine to go ahead and scan it. So, and the thing is, look, if you don't want to put your thumbprint on it, well, just show up and vote in person.
Go vote in person.
I mean, what's a greater hindrance? You're putting a thumbprint on it, or having to have a government ID that you have to show to vote. And I can't recall whether or not you actually need thumbprints in some states to get a driver's license, but I feel like in fact, almost feel like there's a thumbprint like on my. Anyway, your face is on there. I just
changed. I actually just got a separate state thumbprint for either North Carolina or Florida. You need that for a driver's license? I want to say Florida. I think you do. I think you do in Florida, Matt. I think you do. Not in North Carolina, though. But I think, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I did need to do that. Definitely needed to do it for a concealed carry permit.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I
mean, this without a doubt. So I just don't, I get people's concerns as well, considering the surveillance state. But I think it's, there are some things that are just worth it. And there's some things where it's just necessary. And I see elections pretty much in the same light as I see the right to self-defense. So for me, I guess it just doesn't bother me in that. I got a question that I think, you would probably best answer. What do you mean by loopholes in that table specifically? So somebody's asking, they're looking at what was proposed, what was done in Michigan and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, because those states, they had a governor's veto some legislation, but there are obviously there is potential in all those states for governorships to flip this cycle. So people are curious what specifically a loophole would mean. So there's a way out of this requirement or this reform.
Right. So, for example, like in Kansas, there was a bill that said that it prohibits the receipt and expenditures of private monies by election officials, but the state and counties can still receive the funds. Or I can think of a good example was with like the election equipment, where there was like in a special case, somebody could give a waiver to one of the rules. So that's typically how some of these loopholes operate. So, or like an individuals can't donate to election systems, but corporations can, or contractors can. Those were the kind of common loopholes. And then when you look at other, even in election ID loopholes, right? We saw a lot of that in Georgia where you're required to show an ID.
Sure.
But then you read it, and there's a bunch of exceptions. Like if you don't have an ID, well, you have to give like your name and the last 4 digits of your social security number. But then there's no mechanism to tell the local poll worker, well, what do you do with that? Do you check it against something? Is there a database? There's no follow through. The other thing is that private, like there's just so many different ways that the laws are sometimes written to intend to do something, but then they don't address something else. So this is the complication of how the laws work in this country. So again,
and definitely confined
ignorance.
in Wisconsin would be. I mean, I consider that a loophole. That's a part. There was some really good. Scott Walker obviously tried to put forward some really good reforms, but that was the door that was left wide open. It just wasn't an issue until COVID came around, or at least it wasn't thought of that you could use it like that, or have to worry about people using it like that or exploiting it until COVID came around. But Wisconsin, that's a perfect example. Also, so
Texas actually. Let me give you a good example. Is that there's a law saying that any donations to county officials, they can't donate over $1,000. Now, I think that the $1,000 threshold is important. Because what will happen is, let's say I don't know, where in my town where I grew up, guess what's a common polling place? A church.
A church. Yep.
Right. And often the churches, they want to be good citizens, people want to vote. They'll say to the county, we're not going to charge you to use this as a polling place on election day. Well, that's a contribution. But it's worth less than a certain threat. It's not more than $1,000. It's not the millions of dollars that Zuckerberg was. But in the state of Texas, they can't accept donations over $1,000 unless the Secretary of State, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and Speaker of the House all okay it. Like, why is that even in there? Why put that in there? So,
right. Well, you're right about progress and patience. Rome was not built in a day, right? No, certainly election reform could not be conducted in a single legislative session. With all these complications, how different these states are, how much different political will, though, definitely mattered. And it mattered in Arizona. So if you had somebody who looked like they wanted to flake out on something, there was a groundswell and there was a lot of public pushback, people's voices. They were going to make them heard. So
as Pat Buchanan called them, peasants with pitchforks.
Peasants with pitchforks, right. So I guess, the next question to that would be, what's the plan, moving into the next year, the next legislative session, but also, too, because Look Ahead America had so many people on the ground in Arizona, I guess, where would you say there needs to be more efforts, really double down focused? What would be your next target if you had to pick one?
I think that, so that's an interesting question, but it's not, the answer is not as useful as saying that, look, to anybody who wants to help.
Yeah, that's true. Community. I get that.
The truth is that, look, if we have volunteers in Hawaii that want to go engage on this, we'll put them to work. We need them.
Do it.
But if we don't have any volunteers in Pennsylvania, and that's where we need help, well, we can't do anything. So even if so we can only do what our volunteers and our donors allow us to do. Like, honestly, what I'd like to do is have to grow the Look Ahead's national staff such that we have somebody completely dedicated solely to this issue who is constantly connecting to state legislators and then setting up meetings between our volunteers and those state legislators for education sessions and just doing that and only that nonstop. But that's a function of budget. It's also a function of the volunteers we have. So we kind of, as an organization, I think we really punch above our weight, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And the reason why I asked that is because I'm thinking about counties like Montgomery. You brought up Pennsylvania, Montgomery, Pennsylvania, right? Delaware County in Pennsylvania. It just seems to be a lot of people who, are fed up, but they don't know how to direct that energy. And this would be a good place to do it. So it doesn't really matter where you are, and everyone's trying to make a difference at their local level, Matt. But if you're somebody who's frustrated in a county or an area of the state where you don't feel like people are being responsive, that doesn't mean you can't volunteer to help with these efforts and be in Pennsylvania, be part of that team. Not everybody was located in Maricopa County, Arizona. Not everybody was in not everybody was in one or two counties, whether it be Pima, Maricopa, right? So you're helpful no matter where you're coming from in that state. Believe that.
I mean, we have, folks look at, say, a state like Kansas and say, why bother? Yet we had volunteers in that state that are helping to secure their elections. There's no place in the country where you live where there's not something to do. And if you sign up with us, you'll start getting our emails. Folks will reach out to you. Again, sign up to volunteer at lookatatamerica.org/volunteer. We will put you to work, whether it's fighting for election integrity, fighting for justice for J6, fighting against CRT, and we've got some other projects that we've got another webinar coming up on Tuesday Monday or Tuesday next week on our plan to fight corporate censorship, which is kind of a really novel approach where a lot of the corporate censorship debate and calls for action happen at the federal level. Well, this is a way to fight it at the state level, and a very clever technique that we've pioneered. So, again, give us your time, your talent, your treasure. We'll make good use of it.
Yeah, I got to tell you, folks, even sign up for that list, to receive emails from Look Ahead, and they will keep you up to date on what they're doing. And there's always something going on. So, find something that you're passionate about and help out. It's really that simple. It really is. This is good work, Matt. I got to tell you, just from me to you. People complain a lot, and I don't see a whole lot of action, right? And there's very few organizations out there that can claim that they were intimately involved in getting at least some of what they had been advocating for passed. And you can say that. So that's a big deal. And I got to tell you that I got to give it to you. So tell people specifically where to go though and check it out. I know you do have that coming up next week, but anything else you want to tell people about?
If you just look at the news section, or go to Look at America and then scroll down to news, you'll see what we've got coming up. Yeah. So again, you can learn about our report card, which is let me double check it here because I don't want to. I'm pretty sure it's report card, but lookatatamerica.org/report card, and then you can see the full report, which our good friend Rich has been showing on his screen, so people can read it. So yeah, I think that all the resources are at our website, as well as how you can get involved.
Yeah, there it is right there. You can see how many things they have going on. And there's the webinar for corporate censorship. So it's right here. Monday, April 11th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So check it out, folks. And, go there. And my locals community loves these report cards. They do. I mean, there's nobody else doing it. And it's probably the number one question I get about, somebody asking how things are going to be different this year in their state, right? And there's, honestly, Look at America. It's almost like a one-stop shop to go and find that out, folks. So really, that's where it's at. But as always, thanks for joining us, Matt. Come back, tell us what's going on, and we'd love to have you back.
Look, I look forward to coming back, and you do a wonderful thing with your show. It's you deserve a much bigger audience. I'm rooting for you to get there.
Yeah, thanks, my friend. As always, good work. Really. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, Matt Braynard, ladies and gentlemen, Look Ahead America. There's the news section. Go check it out. They got a lot going on, always. Sign up to the mailing list, and they'll keep you posted on it constantly. But yeah, it's right there. You can see it. It's right here. Look at America, anti-corporate censorship. I just got another reminder email about that and wanted to check it out. But, these scorecards are interesting because, again, like I said, nobody else is really doing anything like that. It's something that would interest me to personally do. I just, we all try to stay in our lanes, and there's only so many hats you can wear. But yeah, that's something that was desperately needed after 2020. Really, we had 2 months of trying to, because a lot of this is education, and you had 2 months of trying to explain to people why this was different this time around. And because, there's just no other way to put it. I'm not trying to denigrate anybody, but because there were just so many people who didn't even understand the complexities of different voting methods and how we had been implementing them in the past, what was allowed and what was not. When we pulled Virginia, people didn't even realize what that witness system is all about. They were under the impression that the absentee ballot voting was much like everybody else's state. Signature verification was something that was widely supported. And I think at this point we should, in future polling, maybe even consider moving on to thumbnail verification. We had asked this in the past with some over a year ago now, but definitely found some level of skepticism. And I'm telling you, the signature verification is not perfect. It's not. Thumbnail or fingerprint in any way, shape, or form is something I've seen used in like third world countries that appeared to have a lot more integrity than what we saw last presidential election cycle. I understand everyone's concern about Big Brother. I do. Look, that's one of my biggest concern. When I think about the future of my own children, how ridiculous is this surveillance state going to grow? And the election and subsequent presidency and the subversion of his presidency of Donald Trump, really the lesson everyone should learn there is that you think the voter is sovereign, the voter is supposed to be sovereign, but there is this surveillance state, this permanent government, this administrative state, whatever you want to call it, that no longer feels bound by your decision. And that if they feel they disagree with your decision, then they will absolutely try to do everything in their power, which is vast, to undo it, right? Or at least try to reverse it in the future. Definitely to engage in subversion. There's no other word. Donald Trump's presidency was sabotaged. There were people acting against a duly elected president. During a time of war, arguable. So it's hard to use the T word in the legal definition, but it's definitely subversion. John Kerry, with the backing of his intel buddies, running around the world, telling Mahmoud Abbas and others not to do deals with Donald Trump because they're going to remove him in 3 years, is subversion. That is acting against your own government. So I worry about it as well. But they got it already. I would be more worried about swabbing my DNA and giving it to like 23andMe or Ancestry.com than I would about putting a thumbprint on a, even if they did store it, by the way, even if they did keep that for nefarious purposes, I'd still worry less about that than some of the other things we do anyway on a daily basis. If you're a gun rights guy or girl or a woman, you have to give up your thumbprints. You have to give up all your prints. The iPhone I unlock with either visual software or what, which is not perfect, And that could even be an alternative. Maybe that can be explored in the future. I just think that the thumb is probably the most safe, secure, and advanced technology without being so burdensome. I'd be more concerned about visual identification software than I would be about prints. It's just to me, I'm just thinking out loud here. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I know there are a lot of people I have heard from you in the past and recently after putting this report out. Yeah, I don't like that thumbnail idea. Signature is not perfect. And I know there are just some people out there, and their ultimate goal is just to roll it all back. Excuse only absentee ballot voting. And those excuses that are valid are very limited. Look, folks, hard to put that kind of genie back in the bottle. That's just the reality. In a state like Utah, they have been doing mail-in voting for many, many years. After this past presidential election, there was a movement to restore Utah to a very limited absentee ballot voting state. We polled it. It was overwhelming. People told us, if you could make the case that right now there is no way to ensure the integrity of mass mail-in voting elections, then we will give it up. Politicians didn't want to do it. They didn't even want to make they didn't even want to add reforms to improve the current system. So it does take a lot of education. And during that fight, I heard nothing but ignorance. So education is a huge part of it. It really is. It really is. All right. With that in mind, it is 1:12. All right. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will answer some of the questions we have up, because we do have, we're going to have a few more guests than normal. And I have noticed that we got through a lot of Q&As on Friday, but we'll probably wind up dedicating a little bit more time, unless completely full, to Q&As, because we're adding, people on Wednesday and Friday. And we always have Don helping with the Q&A, but Don and I try to get to as many as possible, always orphan some. So I figure we'll do, instead of Laura taking what I can see already loaded up in the queue, and whatever I don't get to or hit on or touch on, shifting it over to Friday, which already puts us in the rears when it comes to getting that. We'll start to do a few on days when I feel like I can get through the material quickly, which I think we did today. We got through some economic stuff. We had some announcements about polling. One more time before we do. It is April 6th. And for those who have not seen, let me just pull it up, make sure. This Sunday will be the first book club. If you haven't read it, all right? If you haven't read it, or you want to read, you don't need it to join. You just need to be a supporter on peoplespund.locals.com. But you don't need it to follow along, although, of course, it's going to be a lot easier to do so. We're going to start with Jack Snyder, Myths of Empire. Might be, at this point, a little tough to get from Amazon in time. So check your local Barnes & Nobles. We're going to go through Myth of Security Through Expansion, which will basically lay out his thesis, where he will say, I'll take on the Hydra-headed rationales for expansion. I'll take on the domino theory between cumulative gains and losses, offensive advantages, paper tigers, and bandwagons. Sound all familiar to you? All we have been talking about since, we've talked about it before as well, but definitely as the conflict in Ukraine has become more and more prevalent in our national discussion. Faith and threats, overexpansion, the consequence of imperial myths. We're basically going to get through his opening thesis statement, which will be the origins of overexpansion and imperial myths, and then realist explanations for these. All right. There is cognitive and others, but we're talking about maybe 20-something pages we're going to get into leading up to why it matters. 2 is 3 theories of overexpansion. If we have time, we'll get to it, but this is the foundation. Okay. This is the foundation. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to take a quick one, unless Laura is signaling there's something going on. All right. But whatever it is, we'll be back in about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Just don't forget, April 10th. I believe it's the 10th, right? Sunday. It's this Sunday. It gives you plenty of time. If you can go out and grab it now, it gives you plenty of time to get through that. I mean, most people would be able to burn through that in a night or two of bed, reading before bedtime, and which is something a lot of people do, including me. All right. So it's a groundwork, but we'll talk to you in about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. All right. All the best.
How much you wanna up it? that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love. Because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Get on a plane and take a one-way ride. Steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to disappear for a night, just to give in to the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
I have learned that when Laura says there is a problem, there really is a problem. So I do have a personal issue I have to deal with here. But before I do, I'm going to answer some questions. So personal problem can wait a minute. All right. All right. So this is from Raleigh. All right. Or Joel. Sorry about that. Thought it was an interesting question. Laura said from Joel. Rich always says when grandma dies, no one calls the county to remove her from the rolls, but they call life insurance to get paid. Can insurance commissions require death notification? So that's really interesting, Joel. So there is a tool that can be used to help people like me, as I found out when we started doing these investigations, something like LexisNexis. A lot of law firms will have it. The fraud investigator had access to it, who we brought on board to help us corroborate some of our findings. And I found out it's an expensive, but nonetheless, very useful tool. It really intertwines a lot of different records, residential records, property records, right? Tax records, even, not someone's personal taxes, but property taxes, whatever, local, city, stuff like that. Obituaries under a certain person's record. That would be an interesting and easy way, which we have suggested something like that, where if there is another kind, what other flags, almost like a change of address flag, what other flags can we look to that maybe an updated version of the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, for instance, would be able to amend and require certain government agencies look into? Or if not the government, is it too much to ask an insurance company who pays out after getting a copy of the death certificate? Is it too much for one of those people in the process of somebody obviously dealing with end of life issues? Is it too much to ask for to have one of those entities alert the state to the death of that individual? And I don't think it is. Or even something a little bit more strict, which is it doesn't get paid out until somebody's removed from the voter rolls. Now, I don't know if there's any, personally, being my own worldview, I would not like somebody's death benefit to be held up over that. But is it too much to ask for State Farm or Wells Fargo or whoever the hell is paying out a death benefit? The Department of Veteran Affairs, if they're veterans, which was another idea, almost every veteran has a death benefit. It may be almost nothing. Some pay extra to get a higher death benefit. Is it too much to ask for the Department of Veteran Affairs to alert the state on record? They have the person's most updated address. They have the newly deceased veteran's most updated address. Even if they lived in multiple states, they would actually be able to see that and see if that person remains on other state rolls, not just the current states. This is an idea that I like to call too comprehensive for the simpleton politicians that we have elected. Because, of course, it makes a lot of sense. Just like when Newt Gingrich tried bringing U.S. democracy into the modern world, he ran into so many issues when he was a spokesperson. It was obvious. It's like a plan like that. Or a plan, for instance, instead of school districts taking money from states to buy ungodly amounts of PEE, which are useless, right? I mean, I'm not sure anybody would seriously argue anymore that there's studies that conclusively prove mask wearing works. There are not, which is why Great Britain finally threw the towel in on them, because they spent a lot of money to try to prove they were and could not. Instead of doing that, why not hire somebody who has filtration technology that not only takes COVID out of the damn air of the school system, which can be very easy by adding to their HVAC system, but also flu and God knows how many other viruses. We had somebody try to pitch that here. Said, look, the amount of money that the state is giving you to make sure that you have enough band masks, you have enough disposable masks, you have enough this, that, and the other thing, sanitizer, wipes, hand wipes. You would be surprised how much cheaper it would be to just implement my technology. Too smart of an idea. Too smart. It's a really good question, Joel. And truth is, there are. It's just that there's no appetite for it among these people. None. See, the left likes the concept of voter fraud to circulate. They do. They want to discourage the right. Even if they engage in it and do something wrong, they like to use it as a way to try to make the right look crazy. It fits them. It suits them. So fixing these issues is not, you have to bring them to the point of embarrassment. Like in Florida, for instance. Many of those reforms were bipartisan, not because, the ability to count fake ballots in Miami-Dade didn't favor them. They were embarrassed. They looked like fools. So they caved. Right? And sometimes you have to just find the right motivation to get, some of these smarter policies across the finish line. But that's a really good question. The last one I'll take, because I have to apologize for this once in a while and get a family emergency. Can you ask Rich on what steps he would take to fix the inflation issue or I would take a lot. Jay, I guess you're saying if Rich had carte blanche, didn't have to worry about separation of powers or, sadly, I may not be the best one to ask this because I would probably put the country through a lot of pain that I do in my heart of hearts believe is absolutely necessary to spare future generations from economic calamity. I'm not talking about disruption, a dip in the business cycle. I'm talking about a complete collapse of our currency, a call-in of our debts, stagflation, a period that would make prior periods of stagflation look like minor recessions. I mean, fact is, I'm not someone who believes you can go right back to backing the US dollar with gold, using gold standard or something. I just think we're way beyond that, unfortunately, now. But we would have to completely cut the money supply, or part of it would be to wait out catching up to the existing money supply, because you can't take currency out of circulation like that. All right. So also, I mean, there's multiple ways to handle this. Obviously, I would become energy not independent, dominant, energy dominant, because you have to secure the backing of what is right now fiat currency. You have to secure the backing of it. Becoming energy dominant would ensure that everyone would still be sold. They would have to pay for our energy in our currency, and that's where we're at, right? That's the danger we're facing right now, that in the future that won't be the case. And not only wouldn't they not be paying in our own currency, but they wouldn't be paying each other in the US dollar, right? It's not just the exports that we put out. It's when Saudi Arabia sells to China, Saudi Arabia accepts the yuan instead of the US dollar, right? And so on and so forth. When Russia sells to Germany, then Germany is paying them in the Russian ruble, right? So, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that really can and does need to be done. Monetary policy has been a disaster for this country. It has not only prolonged pain, but has ensured that when that pain comes, it will be much worse. The only thing is that can be argued as useful in my mind is the control of rates, setting of rates, of course. And I would dramatically raise rates. I would. Of course, it's going to hurt the housing market. Of course it is. It's going to hurt a lot of other markets. But we made this. We created this. And there's a slew of other things I would do. But we created this. And in order to make sure we don't pass the buck, pass that pain, I mean, really, you got America's going to have to ask itself a very serious question. Are you this selfish that you want your children and grandchildren to suffer for your mistakes? And ultimately, what is your cowardice? Because you're trying to skirt responsibility for something you allowed to happen. Maybe you didn't do it, but your parents' generation did it. They passed it on to us. And we're the ones now who face that decision. And another part to that energy, by the way, is that the debt is also what is so serious when we're talking about inflation, and we're talking about the issue of our currency, because it's only sustainable right now because it's cheap to borrow or to pay back. At this point, we already borrowed it. It's cheap to pay it back. If we must continue to borrow at these rates, and rates continue to rise as they must, then it will get more and more expensive. If rates were for instance, if rates were as high as they were even in the 1970s, we would barely be able to service our debt. That's the real reason why Powell isn't racing to do what he knows needs to be done. He doesn't want to cost the government more money that we simply don't have. You increase rates, you increase the cost of borrowing. So something with the debt absolutely has to be tackled. They're going to use this word, what was the word they used when the Europeans tried to do it? Cut back on spending, and they used this ridiculous, scary word. I'm trying to recall it now, and I can't. Headspace a little messed up right now, but it was scare the hell out of people. It started with an A, I believe. Austerity. If we don't engage in something like that right now, what the hell do you think our future generations are going to have to do? Or even maybe us in our future when we're older and no longer in the labor force. And we're really counting on some of those things to come through. We have to deal with the main primary drivers of spending to ensure that any increase in the cost of borrowing, we don't assume. And unfortunately, even if you were to go gangbusters with energy and become dominant, you still could not grow your way out of our debt. You have to grow and cut, grow and cut, grow and cut. Primary spenders, the chief expenses in this country. Conservatives love to talk about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all true. They, however, don't want to talk about the biggest contributor of defense spending. If we did not have to worry about Ukraine and taking care of every other incompetent so-called ally, really a traitor, we could start to pull back. Maybe worry about our own borders instead of the borders of Ukraine. We could start to pull back. The spending Russia does on its military is infinitesimal compared to ours. And truth be told, the sad part about all of this is that this should have been done many, many years ago, because right now, there is an argument to make that if we significantly pulled back, then China would surpass us in technology and capability. Well, yeah, that's probably true. And guess what? It's probably going to happen even if we don't pull back. The real question is, how long-lasting damage are you willing to take? Would we be able to temporarily get our, together, regroup, reform some serious structural issues with our economy and our fiscal position, and then get back in the game? Or do we pretend foolishly that we can continue at this rate and collapse ourselves? It would be irony, considering it's what the Soviet Union did when they lost the Cold War to us. They refused to accept they were no longer capable. They didn't have the money. They didn't have the will. So there it is. All right. With that in mind, it is 1:33. Before I go, again, don't forget, Sunday, Jack Snyder's Myths of Empire. Okay, read up to everyone. It may have a different edition, but read up, go past cognitive explanations, why it matters. If you want to continue, knock yourself out. But we're going to talk up to 3 theories of expansion. We'll probably wind up stopping there. All right, so we're going to lay out first what is the introduction to his thesis, which is, these are the myths of empire that actually, where did they come from, by the way? What are they? Where did they come from? And why I'm going to prove that they lead to the ultimate destruction of empire, not the betterment of it, not the expansion of them. They destroy them. And that's the path we're on right now. So it's a great place to start. All right. So don't forget that. That's Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Locals supporters. You don't need the book. All you need to be is a local supporter. But if you're like me, you like a nice physical book in hand. All right. With that in mind, if you're watching on YouTube, you like the video, go ahead and like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell. That'll let you know when we're going to go live. But we implore everybody to go to Rumble and sign up to Rumble. All right. Even that conversation I just had with Matt, you never know. There may be some pansy who loses their crap and can't accept what we said. So they have a tantrum, and that's a wrap. All right. So also, while you're there, now is a great time to sign up for the locals community. peoplespundit.locals.com. peoplespundit.locals.com. Got some more merchandise photographs emailed to us. That's great. Keep sending them along. You have the People's Pundit merchandise, which you can get in the link below. Accuracy Matters or Inside the Numbers. Send us a picture with it. Let us know whether we can use it on our it's going to be like a little collage commercial kind of thing. All right. And they're really cool. And I'm so glad you guys are enjoying those hoodies. If you haven't gotten the shirts yet, they're equally as comfortable. And we're moving into the warmer, obviously, weather. So you're not going to be able to wear that hoodie as comfortable as it is. I'm getting ready to fold mine up and pack mine away for the winter too. It sucks. I love it. But that's where we're at. So whether you got the shirts, the hoodies, whatever it may be, the sweaters, send them on over. And we are looking into some other things that people have asked us to get. But I think we did really well with picking really comfortable clothes, which is what I wanted them to be. I didn't want some crappy paper-like kind of like merchandise like I've gotten from some people before. These are super cozy. You will be happy with them. All right. What else am I missing here? Public polling project, share it far and wide. right? But it does, like I said, look like we're going to get a little check-in on Biden's approval before we launch the bigger project. All right, with that, I'm going to go. As always, thanks for watching. Follow me on Twitter still at peoples_pundit and on Getter at Peoples Pundit. Had big, nice little audience on Getter for What Are the Odds this past Monday. That if you missed that, go and check it out. Good times, good times. All right. And then Friday, we'll be back at noon Eastern Standard Time. Don't miss it. We'll have Don Smith. We'll answer a lot more questions. I got a few off the board today, but I see one or two we're going to wind up dragging over to Friday, and that's fine. And we'll get to them. So it's our Q&A, and don't miss it. All right. All right. All the best, folks. See you in about 48 hours. A little 46 at this point. Locals, see you in a little bit.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker, you're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love, because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
We can get on a plane and take a one-way ride, steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to disappear for a night, to give into the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away.